So it's no secret that exorcisms are still a practice done today, but the Catholic Church really likes pretending that they don't because of the negativity and stigma around it. Technically speaking, the Catholic Church authorizes the use of exorcism for those who are believed to be the victims of demonic possession. Specifically, in Roman Catholicism, exorcism is a sacramental but not a sacrament, unlike baptism, confirmation, or confession. So unlike a sacrament, exorcism's efficiency depends on two elements: authorization from valid and legitimate church authorities and the faith of the exorcist. The church will ask publicly, and in a position of authority, in the name of Jesus Christ, that a person or object be protected against the power of the evil one and withdrawn from his dominion. Now, the rite of exorcism was revised in January of 1999 and assumes that possessed persons retain their free will, though the demon may hold control over their physical body, and involves prayers, blessings, and invocations with the use of the document of exorcisms and certain supplications. Typically, the individual will be restrained, and the priest will perform a ritual of prayers to remove the evil spirits. Solemn exorcisms, according to the canon law of the church, can be exercised only by an ordained priest or higher, with the express permission of the local bishop, and only after a careful medical examination to exclude the possibility of mental illness. The Catholic Church has between 500 to 600 official exorcists, by the way, with the vast majority operating in Latin America and Eastern Europe. Now that we're all clear on the formal definition of exorcisms, let's dive into this lovely video from 2014. The ritual was captured on camera by a man who heard the shrieks of a woman inside the sanctuary and filmed it through a peephole. The incident occurred at the Assumption of the Virgin Mary Church in Vranov nad Digi in February of 2014, and the church priest, Marek Dunda, confirmed the video is real, but mentioned that if something's filmed through a keyhole, he's not going to say anything about it, which that's a dodging the question kind of answer if I've ever heard one. And trust me, I'm the daughter of a politician. He told the newspaper he carries a mandate from his bishop to perform exorcisms. He said that the group was asking God to protect and to liberate the person that was suffering, which included using a Latin prayer asking for help, and of course it helps. Look, I'm no expert on exorcism rituals, yet. But if you have to state that of course something helps, in my personal opinion, I'm a little skeptical. It's kind of hard to tell what's happening in the video, but it appears that at least two people surround the woman, who can be heard screaming in agony with momentary pauses in between for the duration of the just under 2-minute long video. Daniel Trokta, who shot the video after hearing the screams, warns people in the description to watch the chilling footage while wearing headphones. When asked about the condition of the woman in the video, the priest said any details about her or her state were private. And while I'm glad the church is respecting her privacy, I just hope the poor woman has been cured and healed. As much as I joke about it and I make light of it, demonic possession is no pleasant or laughing matter. We all know that demonic spirits like to communicate through Ouija boards, but did you know that they've also figured out how to text to get their message across? Back in 2014, Father Marian Rachel from Hauntings, Poland, claimed to have received several digital missives from the Prince of Darkness after performing a failed exorcism on a high school-aged girl. The Austrian Times reported that the girl's soul remained possessed by a demon, so it's pretty legit. According to the holy man, the author of these texts is an evil spirit who has possessed her soul, adding, often the owners of mobile phones are not even aware that they are being used like this. However, in this case, it is clear. He referred local news reporters to one of Satan's texts that read, "She will not come out of hell. She's mine. Anyone who prays for her will die." After the father replied, Beelzebub took his turn and said, "Shut up, preacher. You cannot save yourself, idiot, you pathetic old preacher." According to the priest, clearly this young girl has been possessed and needs further help. It's not known whether the beasts also use WhatsApp, Facebook, Messenger, or Twitter. Seriously though, if God works in mysterious ways, demons work in really, really lazy ones. I guess work smarter, not harder, but I hope my texts don't get hacked. Does anyone else know about Canada's first ever case of possession? This is an event that dates back to the 1600s. Leading figures in Quebec City during the 1660s, to be specific, suspected an alleged witch, Danielle Voyle, of employing diabolical arts to induce a demon to possess Barbe Halai, a young girl working at a manor house in nearby Beauport. Both the witch and the family of the girl had recently arrived in Quebec at the time, and the tiny village had fewer than 800 people. And when strange things started to happen to the family, people were a little thrown off. How strange, you might ask? People recorded details about them that we don't have for other people in what was known as New France. The French colonists treated this particular case of demon possession in the ways familiar to them from their country of origin. They appear to have assumed the demon itself matched the demons of Catholic tradition. Now, this poor girl continued to experience the symptoms of demonic possession for months after the alleged witch was executed, apparently on the orders of Bishop François de Laval. Sadly, the court details of the crime and sentencing have been lost, but we can assume. Historians have noted that the end of the ordeal came in the form of an exorcism, or what sounds very much like one, conducted by a layperson using a rib bone believed to belong to the deceased Jean de Brébeuf. Saint Jean de Brébeuf was a French missionary who was captured and killed in 1649, by the way. To quote the history texts, we have a laywoman who would normally not be permitted to perform an exorcism, in fact performing an exorcism in all but name. Experts consider this an example of the cultural compromises that the frightened colonists felt they had to make. These colonists were pretty few in number, and were cut off from France for most of the year, and were kind of in trouble. They needed support from a king, who might turn his attention away from them at any moment, towards folks that were just generating more income. And also, they needed help from indigenous allies, who they didn't always respect. Not good to offend those that you need help from. If you're looking for the records, experts have quoted sources including the memoir of a local aristocrat, the personal correspondence of a nun living in the town's convent, the biography of another nun who spent a year attempting nightly exorcisms, and the daily records of nearby priests. These accounts shed light on how town authorities attempted to deal with this affliction, which included horrifying visions, violent outbursts, all usual demon stuff if you ask me. Has anyone ever heard of the International Association of Exorcists? So it's an organization that was founded in 1990 by 6 priests, including the world-famous exorcist of Rome, Father Gabriel Amorth, and Father Jeremy Davies. Its statutes were approved by the Roman Catholic Church on June 13th of 2014, and this organization provides training and support to exorcists and also helps to raise awareness of the issue of demonic possession. It has around 250 members from 30 countries, and all those members are priests who have been authorized by their bishops to perform exorcisms. The organization is composed of mostly Catholic priests, but there are a couple of Anglicans and Orthodox folks, so made a little bit of variety. The association recently published a Mexican Catholic priest's report of a significant increase in the extraordinary action of the devil. Devotees who seek miracles have been victims of numerous cases of oppression, obsession, and demonic possession, according to the Reverend Andres Lopez, who is a member of the College of Exorcists of the Primacil Archdiocese of Mexico. He described the skeletal Santa Muerte, also known as Holy Death, or the Angel of Death, as a growing cult or sect that is a fusion of Brazilian Quimbanda, Cuban Santeria, and occult Satanism. He's also associated it with organized crimes such as robberies and narco selling. So overall, just a bad time for folks who live in that area. Okay, here's a doozy of a case. In summer of 2013, 25-year-old John Jenkin from Combermere, England, expressed fears that he would kill his mother. While in his deranged state, he approached a random van driver, put his hands in the air in a surrender motion and cried out, "I am armed, but it's not in my hands." Desperate to avoid committing such an atrocity, he tried to end his life by downing a cocktail of whiskey, painkillers, LSD, and attempting to end himself in a river. He was discovered later that day, unstable, and smeared with his own red fluids after self-inflicting. After these events, he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital where the staff was like, "Yeah, you're low risk." And they're like, "Get out of here, pal." I'm no expert, but I'd hate to see high risk if that's considered minimal. Later that evening, he confessed to a group of friends that he was possessed by demons, saying, "I'm the devil, I need to confess." He said his mother had become aggressive and controlling after the events of that day, and that same night his sister Katie had confided to one of her own friends that she was pretty worried about her brother, saying, "Like, it doesn't look like him, doesn't seem like him, something's off." The next morning, after a brutal argument with his mother and sister, this guy went downstairs and hit his mother with lots of blows to her head with the sharp end of an axe, and when his sister came downstairs, he attacked her as well to stop her from screaming. Guess the sister was sadly right to be worried. After the killings, Jenkins was found stark nude, crouched behind a bench, acting erratically. Well, more erratically. When a police officer asked him if he had taken anything, he was like, "Lives." A court has sentenced him to a minimum of only 12 years in prison, which doesn't feel like enough. Alrighty, we're ending today with a personal favorite tale that I think needs to be talked about more, the case of the black lace veil. Now, while I obviously love the idea of a cute gothy aesthetic, this is anything but. After one of his public lectures, Ed Warren, the man we all know to love or hate, was conversing with a couple that had been in the audience, where a boy introduced himself as Alan and explained that he'd brought his girlfriend Lonnie to the lecture because he suspected that she'd been overtaken by some sort of occult influence. He explained that when his girlfriend became angry, her features would change into something resembling a wolf, and then the voice of a different person would speak from inside of her. Now, when Ed's wife Lorraine walked over to the group, Lonnie experienced an episode of instantaneous possession and lurched out in an attempt to attack Lorraine. This incident terrified everybody in the vicinity, with the Warrens ending the audience chat session immediately, and Ed was like, "Okay, let's get you folks out of here so we can deal with this privately." And Lorraine stayed outside because she's like, I'm gonna take a minute. In the backstage room, the girl was fully under possession, breathing heavily, and her facial features had transformed into the wolf-like appearance the boy had talked about. After about 10 minutes, the possession passed, and Lonnie was lucid enough to explain dealing with memory loss, along with losing hours and days of her life over the last couple of months, which is a symptom common in possession. She went on to share her background, that she was a girl wealthy enough to buy whatever she wanted, but money can't buy love. Originally, her now boyfriend Alan had refused all of her advances and bribery attempts at becoming hers, so she resorted to visiting a store prominent in selling books to help with witchcraft, and bought a book on black arts. And she performed a ritual to get a lover. This ritual involved, you guessed it, the black lace veil, on top of which she placed a crown of goat horns before renouncing God in her baptism, along with swearing allegiance to Satan, and finalizing the ritual by washing down the vow with a cup of animal life source. Simple stuff you can get at the grocery store. About a month after Lonnie performed the ritual, Alan began paying her the attention she craved, making her little world perfect. But what she hadn't counted on was that she was in debt to the demonic. She gave them permission to enter her life. Ed knew right away, crap, Lonnie's gonna have to undergo an exorcism, so he made contact with a priest the next morning who was able to come and assist. Upon arrival, the priest just wanted to make sure, so he instructed Lonnie to close her eyes and slowly count to 20, while his assistant stood behind her and placed a cross behind her head. The entity possessing the girl suddenly went wild, screaming, "Take it away, it burns, take it away," like she was freaking out during the entire exorcism, kept screaming, she's mine, her soul is mine." The spirit was eventually separated from Lonnie, but just before it departed, it vowed it would return to another. The Warrens gathered up everything, the veil, the conjuring book, all the paraphernalia, and brought it home. But I'm not done yet. Video's not over here. Later on, as time goes on, Ed receives a phone call from a man named John Rand, who's like, "Hey, can you meet my daughter? She has a natural knowledge of what he took to be witchcraft," and he was a little concerned. When she stared at people, even when they weren't aware of it, she'd fill their mind with inhuman terror. John called Ed because, well, Charlene was manifesting different personalities, some male, some female, some that could even be called human, but all making extremely threatening statements to John and his wife. He had already brought Charlene to various doctors, clergymen, and they were all like, "Talk to Ed. Ed can fix your problems." So Ed's like, "Okay, come on over, let's see what we can do." So when he met Charlene, he went to go shake her hand, and she backed away and stared distrustfully at him, keeping track of every move he made. His attempts to question her resulted in no-end answers, and her eyes began to wander about the room in boredom. When they landed on the black veil in the corner, Charlene jumped up, grabbed it, and clutched it to her chest. Her features immediately began to transform into those of a wild, sneering creature, distinct from this otherwise pretty girl. Ed drew 2 vials of water to himself, one unblessed, the other blessed by an exorcist, and moved away from what was no longer Charlene, but an inhuman spirit, a lesser devil of hell. Horrid moaning and various animal sounds came from the girl as Ed blessed her, banishing the demon away for now a second time. Yeah, those items have been locked up ever since, and I don't ever want to see them back in this world. What better place to start today's list than an old abbey? Specifically, Rush Abbey is a now ruined abbey in the civil parish of Maltby, Rotherham, South Yorkshire, England. If I mispronounced any of that, I apologize, I tried. It is in the valley of Maltby Beck and is administered by English Heritage. It's also listed in the National Register of Historic Parks and Gardens. The abbey was founded in 1147 when the stone buildings were raised on the north side of the beck. The co-founders of Rush were Richard de Buzzley, likely the great nephew of the first Roger de Buzzley, the Norman magnate builder of Tickhill Castle, and Richard Fitzturgis. When the monks first arrived in South Yorkshire from Newminster Abbey in Northumberland, they chose the most suitable site of the stream that runs through the valley to build their new Cistercian monastery. 25 years later, at the end of the century, the Norman Gothic Great Church, dedicated to the Virgin Mary, had been finished, as well as most of the other buildings. The control of the abbeys was vested in the de Vesci family, lords of Rotherham, who in turn subfeuded the land to Richard Fitzturgis, lord of Wickersley. From the start, the Abbey of Rush, built for the so-called white monks, as the Cistercians were known, had an almost otherworldly air. It was, after all, built at the northern end of an area once owned by Sherwood Forest, and it was said that Robin Hood went to mass here. At its height, it supported a community of around 175 men, of whom around 60 were choir monks, and the remainder being lay brothers. A Cistercian innovation. Eventually, on the death of the co-founder Fitzturgis, control of the abbey passed to his son Roger, now de Wickersley, and then eventually to a granddaughter, Constantia, who married William de Levitt, a family of Norman origin who were the lords of the nearby village of Houghton Levitt. The abbey continued in the Levitt family until 1377, when John Levitt sold his rights in the abbey to the London merchant Richard Barry. By the time of the dissolution, full control of Rush Abbey was held by Henry Clifford, 2nd Earl of Cumberland, who came in for numerous grants at the dissolution, as he was married to the niece of King Henry VIII. Back in 2021, members of the Conisbrough Paranormal Research Association were adamant that they had spotted a spooky monk at the old Abbey. Dean, age 38, from Conisbrough, said that they had been up there taking photos, and the most interesting one was near the first gatehouse. They had found that one of the pictures, which had showed a monk from the chest up, with an orb, like a ball of energy, and the photo showed the outline of his head and a hood. Now, they were still going through the photographs at the time of the articles, because they took up to 1,000, but they were pretty sure it was a monk that would have lived there in the 12th century, when it was still an abbey. So the footage we have today was from the Haunted Finders channel here on YouTube, where a group of investigators had their equipment pick up a lot of spirits still kicking around on the grounds. Time to move over to Nest Church for a little change of pace, and maybe I won't bungle up as many words. Eerily surrounded by gigantic fields, this church is so rural that Google Street View didn't even have documentation of it by 2019. Hell, as of the time of my recording of this, they still don't have a Street View option. There are other roads nearby that have been covered, but nowhere near the church. Like we got like here, the church is over here, none of this. If that isn't ominous enough, I don't know what is. Originally organized as the Norwegian Evangelical St. Johan's Congregation of Meeker and surrounding counties in 1861, Nest Church, located in Litchfield, Minnesota, is said to be one of the most haunted locations in the state. This tiny country church is said to be haunted by the spirits of settlers killed during the Sioux uprising of the 1860s. In the nearby town of Acton, a handful of young locals shot and killed 5 settlers, including a woman and her daughter, and all 5 are buried there. The incident sparked a violent conflict that ended with a mass execution of 38 Dakota residents in Mankato, a dark chapter in Minnesota's history. Some folks have reported the lights of the church come on by themselves and apparitions spotted on the premises. Avid ghost hunters frequent the grounds, and back in 2015, there was actually an instance of 4 people breaking into the church and being charged with felony burglary and criminal damage to property. Church officials tried to curb the trespassing and unwanted break-ins by offering guided tours. The video in question today seems to show an apparition caught on camera. You let me know what you think in the comments. Back to Abbeys we go, with Kirkstall Abbey next up on the docket. The picturesque ruins have been drawn and painted by artists such as J.M.W. Turner, Thomas Girton, and John Sell Cotman. Kirkstall Abbey was acquired by the Leeds Corporation as a gift from Colonel North and opened to the public in the late 19th century. The gatehouse became a museum, which is now part of the Leeds Museums and Galleries group. The English houses, of which there are remains at Fountains, Rievaulx, Kirkstall, Tintern, and Netley, were mainly arranged after the same plan, with slight local variations. Situated just outside of Leeds, Kirkstall Abbey still stands to its full height and for centuries offered a peaceful existence for the monks who lived and worked there. However, daily life could be harsh, and like any community, it was not immune to intrigue and mystery as religion developed. With over 800 years of history, this abbey attracts many visitors and is considered one of the oldest attractions in the region. During the dissolution of the monasteries under King Henry VIII, this abbey was emptied and its remains were left behind. Now, after that dissolution, sightings of ghosts have become common, and by the 19th century there were reports of ghostly apparitions in the nave of the church. One witness claimed to have seen a funeral procession of somber men, clad in white, proceeding slowly. Now, the abbey is also famous for its repeated haunting manifestation of a former abbot that walks around the building that has now been converted to the Abbey House Museum, although you're more likely to hear him moving around than you are to see him. Some also believe that there is a mad monk who haunts the abbey after his brother was killed by highwaymen on his way back from the Fountains Abbey, which is another abbey in Yorkshire. Mad with guilt and despair, he began carving his brother's initials into the abbey grounds that can apparently still be seen in small bench nooks around the ruins even now, and he continues to walk around the abbey to this day. The grounds are also home to a young female entity called Mary, who witnessed her lover ending the life of another and then turned him in. She has often been seen with the ghost of a dog, but we're not sure if they're connected or not. The footage we have today, by the way, is another stellar example of spirit communication tech at work. I've used some of those things before myself. They are quite reliable and pretty freaky. Okie dokie, internet sleuths, I need your help with this next video. In my opinion, it's an internet legend that's been kicking around since 2007. Heck, I remember the first time I watched it on my little iPod under my High School Musical comforter, terrified. I was up too late, and when my brain saw something like this, well, I was already in the dark. Well, let's just say it sent my mind racing. I'm the kind of gal who needs to have all the doors closed in a room or I cannot sleep. It is not happening. Heck, I was recently in an area that was affected by a weird power outage, and I think I lasted like an hour in the darkness with my 20 candles before I went to a home with power because I couldn't stand being alone with my thoughts, and yeah, nope. Not it. Sorry, back to the video I go. This one depicts David Holley and Jake Garrison, who alleged that they stumbled upon an abandoned chapel in the woods and decided to do some sleuthing. As one does. How very Scooby-Doo of you. And the duo encountered a spirit playing the piano while they did. and very well if I say so myself. Fun fact about me, folks, I took Royal Conservatory piano testing when I was younger, so I have an idea of what I'm talking about. I used to have to sight read. Other than that, I have no idea where the funeral channel guys are located, so let me know in the comments what you know.
Number 5. A close personal working relationship with Benito Mussolini. The Vatican isn't just the seat of the Catholic Church. It's also the smallest country in the world. Did you know that? Despite existing inside of Italy, the Vatican isn't part of Italy, but rather its own country, a little sovereign state. About 1,000 people live there total. But it hasn't always been that way, though. It wasn't founded as its own separate city. And the reason it became that way is a little darker than I'm sure the church would like to admit to: a treaty with infamous fascist leader Benito Mussolini. In 1922, Mussolini and the National Fascist Party came to power, crushing democracy and putting up a pretty hostile dictatorship in its place. In 1929, Mussolini and the church came together to meet and sign a treaty, granting the church the status as a private enclave, a sovereign state inside of Italy. The deal was, Mussolini wouldn't bother the Vatican, and they wouldn't bother him. Mussolini even paid out a massive settlement, which the church invested and is believed to have been valued at $780 million, alongside the church getting tax exemption status and priests getting a healthy salary from the Italian government. All of those benefits you can thank fascist leader Benito Mussolini for. Perhaps most illuminating, however, was a clause that protected the Vatican's dignity, so to speak, meaning as part of their laws as a sovereign state, they were allowed to arrest and try anyone who criticized the people and the church. In exchange for signing this treaty, the Catholic Church publicly supported the fascist dictatorship and was recognized as Italy's official government. The Vatican's own newspaper printed shortly after the deal went down, "Italy has been given back to God, and God to Italy." And they had the support of someone who was involved in hundreds of thousands of deaths to thank. Isn't that fun? And if you're looking for way more church conspiracies, old secrets, relics, all kinds of things, ghouls, goblins, aliens galore, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some. Really, we'll do just about anything on this channel. I'm talking about the church right now. So hit subscribe, make sure you ring that little bell as well so you don't miss a single scream, but you do that at the end of this video, okay? Because I got 4 more church scandals coming up for you right now. Number 4, the banquet of chestnuts. Believe it or not, this might shock you, more than a few popes have been less than pious. You know, we'll go deeper later in the list, but several popes would be on the naughty list. Among them, Alexander VI, who you might know better as Rodrigo Borgia. Rodrigo was said to have some pretty bizarre hobbies, even by papal standards. He apparently loved to watch horses mate. That was apparently one of his favorite ways to spend an afternoon. Once or twice, sure, you know, we all get curious, Rodrigo, but frequently, I don't know, man. I don't know. Maybe you have to be there. Anyway, that's not even the most controversial thing the Borgias were involved in. Seriously, look up the Borgias after this video, there was a lot. One of the most infamous things Rodrigo got involved in was called the banquet of chestnuts, sometimes referred to a little more colloquially as the joust of... I don't really think I can say this and stay in the family-friendly guidelines. The joust of women of the night, if you know what I mean. Are you following? It's a word that they say in Game of Thrones a lot. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe you're not old enough to be watching this channel. The joust that shall not be named wasn't quite a literal joust, although there was a great deal of thrusting and charging. Excuse me. Cesare Borgia, real-life Jaime Lannister and one-time Assassin's Creed Brotherhood villain, arranged a banquet in his chambers in the Vatican with 50 of the hardest-working courtesans of the time. They danced after dinner, then disrobed, and then the joust began. Rodrigo and his family gleefully threw chestnuts on the floor, forcing the women to grovel around their feet like swine. They offered prizes, clothes, jewelry, all sorts of baubles for the man who could fornicate with the most courtesans, that's pretty interesting. That's a pretty interesting event for the Pope to preside over. Think about the next time you're at an official church event in your community, like a bake sale or something. Just think about the other events the head of the Catholic Church and the voice that speaks to God was holding and participating in. Number 3, killing Joan of Arc over pants. Joan of Arc is a very familiar name to Catholics and, well, just about everybody. She's a pretty famous historical figure. You probably know her famously as a saint. You might recognize her as a force for feminism. I think she was in one of the Bill and Ted movies. Well, her status as a saint came a long time after some trouble she was embroiled in with the church, who at one time saw her as an enemy to their very ideals, going so far as to consider her their #1 enemy. In 1429, the young Joan of Arc believed that God had spoken out to her and helped instigate an uprising to get the English out of France. Very cool for the French people who wanted them gone, but some high-ranking influential members of the clergy who had ties to the English weren't terribly fond of this wild woman who was going around dressing like a man and claiming that God spoke to her and was kicking all of their friends out of the country. Somebody do something about this wild woman. When King Charles VII enjoyed Joan's help during the many battles against the English, when Joan was captured by English forces, she learned the true extent of his loyalty when he handed her over to the Catholic Church to stand trial for heresy. After all, she was claiming she talked to God, and only the Pope is supposed to do that. And worst of all, Joan of Arc was wearing pants. She was wearing pants while doing it like a man. So Joan was put on trial for heresy and denied counsel, which is against her rights. Saul Goodman would have been furious. Regardless, Joan kept her cool, rather famously, and is famed for her level head. Joan was found guilty of being a rebellious spirit who wore men's clothes, and for these indignations was burned alive at the stake in front of a cheering crowd. In 1456, some 25 years after her horrific death, King Charles VII felt kind of bad about that whole ordeal, ordered an investigation, and made her a martyr. It wasn't until 1920 that she was officially canonized as a saint. Think of it like a heavenly apology. I'm sure the water's fine, I'm sure the air is cool, no bad blood between Joan and the Catholic Church. I bet she's having a great time. I'm sure she appreciated it. #2, buying redemption. Can man find redemption? Can the weight of our sins be undone? Can a person truly change his course? Can an evil man become good? These lofty questions have dominated the hearts of man for years, inspiring countless great works of art and philosophical conundrum. At religion's heart is the concept of salvation and redemption, so it might strike you as more than a little bit bizarre that at one point in time, the Catholic Church was selling absolution for a price tag. Now, before we get into that, we need to talk quickly about an indulgence. No, not eating an extra large cheese pizza by yourself, but that is an indulgence of sorts. If you're like me and you've skipped Sunday Mass for the last 26 years, basically an indulgence in Catholic terms is sort of like a plan or a plea for absolving your sins. Something you have to do to absolve yourself. 30 Hail Marys, confession, that sort of stuff. In the early 15th century, after Pope Julius died, Pope Leo X would inherit the papacy. Leo loved the pleasures that came with being Pope. He loved the big hat. He loved spending lavishly. He loved voluptuous entertainment. He loved living like a king, not a pope. It took him 8 years to completely drain the Vatican's treasury, which other popes weren't really doing. So when St. Peter's Basilica was in the process of being rebuilt, they were plain out of money and needed a fundraiser. But instead of selling Girl Guide cookies door to door, Leo announced that anyone who contributed money to the church would be granted an indulgence. Now, an indulgence was supposed to be a path laid out by a church for your betterment, but it was hawked as if you were buying a sin redemption ticket, like a get-out-of-hell free card. Dominican friar John Testel was named the Grand Commissioner of Indulgences in Germany. Overseeing indulgences was his only job. That's the only thing this guy did, to give you a sense of how many people were doing this. He sold absolution for future sins you were planning to commit later. Pay a small fee, and if you kill a guy next week, totally fine. God says it's okay. Now, this probably worked pretty decent if you had a bit of coin, but if you were an average person, a serf like me, perhaps, you did your best to prepare for an eternity in hell. Salvation was just another pleasure the rich had, and hell is where us poors go. Unsurprisingly, someone got very upset about this new stance from the church. He was pretty upset about this. His name was Martin Luther, and he passive-aggressively left a note on some doors like an upset roommate, and I can't remember if anything ever came out of that, if anything ever happened to him in history. It's lost to time. It's probably unimportant. #1, the plot of Assassin's Creed 2 was real. If you've garnered anything from this video, I sincerely hope it's that the Pope oftentimes does not follow the rules. Yes, the guy interprets the will of God, and he's got a direct phone line to him directly, but that doesn't mean he has to follow every single one of his rules. We've already discussed some truly wild sins, horse mating, chestnut parties, spending money, but let's top it all off with the biggest one, a full-blown assassination conspiracy revolving around a pope ordering a hitman. And you just sit on that for a second. In the 1470s, Pope Sixtus IV hatched a scheme to rid Florence of the Medicis, who was the most influential family in the country at the time, with such power that they rivaled the church. The Medicis had served as the bankers for the papacy for generations, and as such were absurdly wealthy. Pope Sixtus kickstarted this conflict when he swapped the Medicis as the papal bankers to the Pazzi family. Oh, no. The Medicis didn't want to fund the Pope's claim of the town of Imola, which the Medicis wanted to claim for themselves to lord over. So, something had to be done about these meddling Medicis. Pope Sixtus contracted 2 assassins to carry out the plot against Lorenzo and Giuliano de' Medici during Easter Mass on a Sunday, which just feels unbelievably disrespectful to me. If you're the Pope, I mean, ordering an assassin against anybody, morally gray, but doing it on Easter Mass? You're not even allowed to talk in church, but you can orchestrate a political assassin? I don't know. Now, if you're sitting listening to this and you're kind of wondering why some of this sounds vaguely familiar and you don't know why you recognize these names, it's because you might recognize this plotline in between jumping into bales of hay as being a major force in Assassin's Creed 2, where protagonist Ezio Auditore da Firenze ends up helping out Lorenzo Medici a great deal. Yes! The games were really inspired by true history, save for a few extendo blades and boss fights against the Pope. Rodrigo Borgia, as far as we know, never got into a fistfight with any assassins and wasn't killed by Cesare, but I digress. If you remember from Assassin's Creed 2, Giuliano was fatally slain, but Lorenzo survived and rallied support of Florence in a war against the church. Ezio picked off conspirators, and then sailed to Naples to meet King Ferdinand to discuss a peaceful solution to the bubbling war. So in the end, the plot failed drastically because all it really did was make people think that Lorenzo Medici was the coolest guy around and brought intense shame to Pope Sixtus, and it inspired one of the best games Ubisoft ever made.
Number 5 on this list is Cadaver Synod. This is one of the weirdest events in history, guys. Daily Gister says, in 897, the Vatican saw one of the most bizarre episodes in history. The corpse of a pope was put on trial by his living successor. Pope Formosus, dead for a few months, was hardly qualified to defend himself in a court of law. Nonetheless, Pope Stephen VI had the body disinterred, dressed in robes, and propped up on the papal throne to stand trial. He even appointed a deacon to speak on the corpse's behalf. While Stephen VI hurled accusations at Formosus, the accused remained stoically silent, as might be expected of a corpse. The dead pope was found guilty of usurping the papacy. Stephen VI declared all of his acts as pope null and void. All consecrations, all appointments, all ordinations were undone. So, as you guys can imagine, the church doesn't really talk about this episode too much because it's kind of embarrassing, honestly. Clearly, the current pope during this time was not fit to be in charge at all and might have even been losing his mind a little bit. This is pretty dumb, but at least it makes for a good story to tell at a dinner party or something, so there, stuff that one in your back pocket and save it for later, guys. Number 4 on this list is Sixtus VI. Sixtus VI was a pope who was in power back in the late 1400s. He definitely made some questionable life choices though, some of which I'm sure the church would love to forget. Business Insider writes, Sixtus VI, elected in 1471, apparently had 6 illegitimate children, including one with his sister. That didn't stop him from policing the sexual appetites of the underlings, though. He created a church tax on and charged priests for having mistresses. Sixtus VI also had a taste for nepotism, as did many other popes. He made 6 of his nephews cardinals. My dude literally had a kid with his sister. I'm an only child, so I don't really know what it's like to have a sibling, but even I'm grossed out about hearing that. Obviously, it's a pretty bad look for the church when their literal leader is shacking up with his sis. Something that I don't think God or the Bible is gonna look too kindly upon. Number 3 on this list is God's banker. God's banker was the nickname that they gave to a man named Roberto Calvi. Forbes writes, it was described as a scene straight out of an Alfred Hitchcock film. The man's corpse dangled from an orange nylon rope tied to scaffolding under London's Blackfriars Bridge. He was dressed in a grey suit with a white waistcoat and a blue striped shirt. He wore shoes and socks but no tie or belt. An expensive watch on his wrist was stopped at 1:52 a.m. and nearly 12 pounds worth of pieces of bricks were stuffed into his trousers. A young postal clerk had made the grim discovery on his way to work on the morning of June 18, 1982, and alerted the police. Officers who examined the body found a wallet containing around 13,000 in various currencies: Italian, Austrian shillings, American dollars, Swiss francs, and a passport bearing the name Gian Roberto Calvini. This man was found dead, but why and how does the church play into this? Well, the local writes, the chairman of Milan's Banco Ambrosiano, in which the Vatican was the main shareholder, had been found guilty of illegally exporting billions of lire. He shaved off his mustache and fled to London, where he was murdered. An American archbishop wanted for questioning was granted immunity by the Vatican, while 5 Italians were acquitted of the crime in 2007. Basically, this guy was in deep with some very bad people, and the Vatican were some of those people. Also pretty questionable just literally giving immunity to this archbishop because you can. It should also be noted that this banker was believed to be in deep with the mafia as well. The Vatican seems to have an interesting choice in friends. Number 2 on this list is World War II. I don't think it's unfair to say that World War II might have been the closest that we got to a fight where it truly was good versus evil. One side was fighting for freedom and the other side represented death and hatred. Thankfully for all of us, freedom won out in the end and the horrifying regime that was trying to take over collapsed. After World War II, some people had to pay for what they did. After all, it saw arguably the worst genocide in history and some horrible wartime atrocities. People were put on trial and individuals who hadn't been supporting the freedom side were heavily scrutinized. The Vatican during this time was noticeably pretty silent though. Who did they support during this period of time and why didn't they do anything? It's believed that Jewish people were actually rounded up outside of the Pope's window at one time or another, and the Pope would have been able to see firsthand what was actually going on behind closed doors. Why didn't he do anything to stop this? The actions, or lack thereof, of the Pope at the time, Pope Pius XII, have been under heavy fire for years. It's even been thrown around that this Pope collaborated with these deathly acts and was on board with them. Now, there isn't any proof of this, but the Vatican isn't necessarily opening their doors and having people come in to check their records either. They would love to keep whatever went on back then completely under wraps and just forget that it ever happened. Sounds to me like something potentially sketchy might have been going on with the church that they don't want us to know about. And finally, number 1 on this list is Pope John Paul I. This is one of the biggest scandals to rock the church and the Vatican, and something that they're more than happy to keep under wraps. The Week writes, in The Godfather Part 3, a shady deal between the Mafia and the Vatican leads to the murder of the Pope. Was this based on a true story? Possibly. On the morning of September 28, 1978, Pope John Paul I was found dead sitting up in his bed after only 33 days in office. Although Vatican officials claimed the 65-year-old Pope died of a heart attack, there was never an autopsy, and at the time, the Vatican definitely had ties to organized crime. Sure enough, in 1982, Vatican Bank President Father Paul Marinkis resigned from his post after a series of scandals exposed the bank's ties to the Mafia. Eventually, the bank had to repay more than $200 million to its creditors. But Marinkis was never indicted of a crime, and though he was suspected of being involved in several mysterious deaths, including Pope John Paul I, Marinkis successfully claimed diplomatic immunity in the United States and retired to Arizona in 1990 and died there 16 years later. Until I started really digging into potential church secrets, I never had any idea that they had ties to the Mafia. This is because they've tried to cover it up as much as possible. Now, you might be thinking in this example specifically that the fact that they neglected to do an autopsy is evidence of something. Like the church knew that they would find something that they didn't want to be revealed. But the truth is, they never do an autopsy on the Pope. It's believed that performing an autopsy on the Pope will taint the body in some way, and that it'll make it harder to get into heaven. The body must remain clean and untampered within its path to God. This is all fine and good, but it means that you get instances like this where this person potentially got murdered and no one will be able to prove it. It's also really hard to get anywhere with the higher ups of this organization because oftentimes they just claim diplomatic immunity. It's widely believed now that the Vatican was at one point deeply involved with the mafia and might even still be. They have way more money than anyone thinks that they should have, and this money didn't just appear out of thin air. It's possible that their ties with the mafia in this case even caused a murder. Number 5 on this list is Lord Combermere, or maybe better put as the ghost of Lord Combermere. The picture that we're going to look at today depicts the ghostly silhouette of the late Lord Combermere sitting in his chair. Insider writes, amateur photographer Corbet allegedly set up her camera and took this hour-long exposure while the funeral of her brother-in-law, Lord Combermere, was taking place 4 miles from the home. Interestingly, the apparition that appears to be sitting in the deceased Lord Combermere's chair is suggested to be Lord Combermere himself. I think the scariest part about this photograph is the timing. The fact that this was apparently captured literally right when the funeral for this man was being held. It's very possible that his spirit could have still been in and around the area and wasn't quite ready to leave the world of the living yet. Ghost Story UK says, it's thought by some that during that time a servant might have come into the room and sat briefly in the chair, creating the transparent image. This idea was refuted by members of the household, all testifying that they were all attending Lord Combermere's funeral. Sir William Barrett, who investigated the case and reported on it in the Journal of the Society for Physical Research, was not satisfied. Working on the theory that a manservant may have come in and seated himself in the chair, he took a test photograph and got a picture that was almost a duplicate of the Combermere photograph. The matter seemed ended, but as he told in his book On the Threshold of the Unseen in 1918, sometime later he received a letter from Lord Combermere's daughter-in-law about the photograph. She said that the face was always too indistinct to be quite convincing to me, though some of his children had no doubt at all of the identity. I may add, none of the manservants in the house closely resembled the figure and were all young men who were all attending the funeral. No one resembled him and everyone was out of the house when this photo was taken. For years the church and others have tried to explain this photograph, but they just simply can't. Maybe it was the ghost of Lord Combermere, or maybe it was a demon playing a trick on all of us. We may never know. Number 4 on this list is Freddy Jackson. In this photo, we're going to be looking at Sir Victor Goddard's Royal Air Force Squadron. This picture was taken in 1919 after World War I and showed a bunch of young strapping pilots. What's wild about this though is the unexpected visitor that we have in the back row. If we zoom into the top row and look at the man fourth from the left, we can see something over his right shoulder. An apparition of sorts that resembles a human face. After people started taking note of this and examined it, those who had worked with the squadron identified that face as Freddy Jackson. Freddy Jackson was a mechanic with this squadron for a while, but the crazy part is that he had died in a propeller accident several days earlier. Similarly to Lord Combermere, the day that this picture was taken was the day of his funeral. Maybe his ghost showed up because he was pissed all his friends were taking pictures and not paying their respects. But seriously though, how on earth do you explain a photo like that with tons of other people in it? It's impossible for it to have been staged, and it's clear that there's something there. Hopefully Freddy was able to find peace after his impromptu photo bomb. Number 3 on this list is the couple's demon. William Hope was a paranormal investigator who lived from 1863 to 1933. During that time, he was responsible for capturing a wide array of spiritual photographs which showcase ghosts and demons. Now, after evaluating some of his work, I think it's fair to assume that some of it is doctored. I'm not sure how one man would have been able to capture all the demonic pictures that he did without potentially faking a few. That being said though, I don't think that everything he's done has been doctored, and I imagine that there are some with serious legitimacy to them. One of his most famous is of an older couple with what clearly looks to be a demon standing behind them. When they took this photo, nobody was physically there, and they could only capture this devilish creature when they looked at the film after the fact. Some other entries on this list, I mean, you might be able to classify as a ghost, but this is 100% 100% a demon. The eyes are black and unforgiving, and it looks as if you're getting sucked into a black hole of nothingness. You can't make out this creature's lower body at all, and she's just all black. She reminds me a lot of a few urban legends of female demons appearing around the world. Their stories differ, but there are some commonalities between them all. Usually a woman appears like this to a stranger, asks them a few questions, and if they don't answer properly, will drag them to hell. I'm actually surprised that the people in this photograph managed to get out of it safely without feeling her presence or being attacked while they were there. I'm pretty sure that the church can explain this one, they just probably won't like the explanation very much. Number 2 on this list is the lady in the lift. Whenever you step into an elevator, it feels as if you've stepped into a portal of some kind. If you really think about it, it kind of is a portal considering you start on one floor and then finish on a different one. Now obviously there isn't anything magical about said elevators, and this portal of sorts is really just a mechanical innovation that takes you up and down tall buildings. That being said, this non-paranormal portal definition might not apply to the elevator in this photo. As we can see, there are a few people hanging out and chatting by the elevators. This was a picture captured by a doctor in a hospital in Bolivia. The elevator in the right of the image decided to open all by itself though. The group didn't think anything of it at the time, but when they looked back, noticed something fairly unsettling. The apparition of a woman is clearly standing in the elevator, staring right at them. No one knows who this woman is, but it's clear that she's either a ghost or a demon. Elevators have always seemed to have a connection to ghostly apparitions for whatever reason. Maybe it's because they do give off the sensation of being a portal, but there are a lot of stories connected to elevators and hauntings. This photo actually reminds me a lot of a haunted place in Austria. A young girl was at a university residence during Christmas. She was pretty much the only one who stayed there and didn't go home for the holidays. While she was there by herself, she accidentally stepped into the elevator shaft and fell to her death. Now she's set to haunt that elevator and torment those who step inside. Maybe this photo is of a similar story, but just at the hospital. It's impossible to say for sure, but either way guys, I'd be taking the stairs. And finally, number 1 on this list is the little boy. This photo is extremely scary and just flat out disturbing. BuzzFeed writes, the Reddit user who posted this image was deeply skeptical that there was anything paranormal going on, although they couldn't deny there is something chilling about the figure of a little boy staring out from the ruins of an old school. I grew up in a small rural town in between mountains. A couple years ago they were tearing down an old elementary school. A guy my mom knew went in and took pics with his cell phone. When he uploaded them, this was one of the pics. I don't believe in stuff like this at all, I just really don't know how to explain it since it was a cell phone pic, and I'm pretty sure that no one in my podunk hometown knows how to make fake pics. So maybe he doesn't know how, but I know how to explain it. You're in the ruins of an old school, and those ruins are haunted by the demon of a young boy. Sometimes the simplest answers are the right ones, and this to me looks like an example of that. This little dude 100% looks possessed, and you can't even really make out his legs. Nor can you actually see his arms either for that matter. Kind of difficult to make up a logical explanation for a kid with no arms and no legs floating in the middle of an abandoned school. Also, side note, but can you imagine being the one to take this picture? Like you turn a corner and you see that dude and your first thought is, I'm gonna pull out my phone and take a picture of this kid. Like if that's me, I am straight up running out of that thing and we're burning that building hot. Number 5 on this list is Hallstatt Karner. Hallstatt Karner is one weird church, man, let me tell you. I'm all about unique and cool decorations, but human body parts? Kind of where I draw the line, guys. Discovery.com says many bone churches and ossuaries are decorated with femurs and pelvises, but at Hallstatt Karner, these skulls themselves are decorated. More than 600 of the skulls on display in this Benhaus, also known as Bone House in English, bear their former owners' names, professions, and the date of their death. Many are also adorned with decorative garlands and flowers. But perhaps what makes this bone church stand out the most is the fact that the most recent remains to be interred here belong to a woman who passed away in 1983 after having requested the Benhaus as her final resting place. What's more, she might not be the last because the church is still open to receiving similar requests. So yeah, the dark secret here is that there is literal bones still being added. 1983 is really not that long ago when you think about it, and like the article suggests, that's probably not the last person to have been thrown into this array of skeletons. I guess it isn't, but it feels like this should be illegal or something. At the very least, it's just super weird. Like, why is a bunch of dead bodies and bones and stuff bringing anyone closer to God? Isn't the whole point of church to connect with your spiritual side? Not get grossed out by a bunch of dead people who you might have even known at one point. The church is located in Austria and has got to be one of the scariest churches in that country for sure. Unless you want your bones to be added to some religious display, I would stay away from this place. Number 4 on this list is the St. Louis Cathedral, a beautiful church like many on this list, which is riddled with spirits. List first says, like the city it serves, the St. Louis Cathedral in New Orleans is a font of strange myths and legends. Originally built by the city's French rulers, the modern cathedral wasn't completed until the 1850s. According to lore, the ghosts of the old structure came along for the ride. One of the cathedral's better known ghosts, Père Dagobert, was an 18th century priest. Dagobert was renowned for his kindness, especially his willingness to treat the poor and terminally ill. During the 1760s, several members of his congregation decided to revolt against the city's new Spanish rulers. The mainly French and Creole rebels successfully pushed the initial Spanish force out of the city, but a larger force later managed to claim New Orleans for the Spanish king. Infuriated by the earlier rebellion, Irish-Spanish governor Alejandro O'Reilly decided to not only execute the rebels, but also leave their rotting bodies on the doorstep of the St. Louis Cathedral. As a devout Catholic, Dagobert could not stand by while Catholic bodies were so roughly treated. After failing to get O'Reilly's permission to properly bury the bodies, Dagobert led a funeral procession down to St. Peter's Cemetery and placed the slain men in unmarked graves. Dagobert's successor, a Spanish priest named Pierre Antoine, is also said to haunt the cathedral. More intriguingly, Antoine's friend, voodoo priestess Mary Laveau, who often prayed at the church during her lifetime, is also considered to be one of the many spirits inside the cathedral. So we got voodoo priestesses, unmarked haunted graves, multiple spirits of bodies that were buried improperly. This church is just one big mess. Many people think that there are also a bunch of other secrets that this place has that we don't know about. Like, this was a spot for a secret society hundreds of years ago who performed some very questionable rituals, and that's why this place is as haunted as it is. Whatever really happened here, we know it was dark, and we know that it left its mark. Number 3 on this list is Egg Hill Church. This church was home to one of the worst tragedies a church has ever been host to. I've never been a real churchgoer myself, but from my understanding, love, life, spirituality, all of this is supposed to be in the air when you go, and the whole reason for doing so. Death and hate and violence, that's all supposed to be left at the door. Pennsylvania's Egg Hill Church didn't quite do that. Instead, they invited death into the church on one particular Halloween night. Many years ago, the whole community gathered into the church on Halloween. The priest passed around bread and wine as is customary, but this bread and wine was a little off. In fact, it was very off. So off that everyone who had it died. It was poisoned. It's unknown whether the town had collectively decided to end their lives together that night or if this was all the priest's doing, but either way, tens to hundreds of people's bodies lay lifeless on the ground when it was all said and done. Now, what are we left with? Well, the ghosts of all of these people, obviously. Even worse than that, the spirit of this evil priest still lingers here too, and apparently, he isn't done with the living. He's said to be very dangerous and wants to drag visitors down with him and take their life. This whole story is pretty much as dark as you can get, and it's no wonder the place is totally messed up today. Number 2 on this list is St. Nicholas Church. Hey, it's me. It just so happens that my church is haunted by a dozen spirits. Great. List first says St. Nicholas Church is practically haunted by default. That's because the village of Pluckley, its home, is reputably the most haunted locale in all of England. The Kent village is home to the Watercress woman, who occupies the Pinnock Bridge, and to the ghost of a schoolmaster who committed in front of his pupils. According to a conservative estimate, Pluckley contains no fewer than 12 active spirits. The church itself is said to be the home of both the beautiful ghost of Lady Daring and the Lady in Red, a ghost who searches the adjacent churchyard for her lost baby. The ghost of a former miller who worked in the area is also said to haunt the churchyard in search of a long-lost love. Also, the ghost of a monk at nearby Greystone's house is also said to be seen during the night. Finally, visitors to St. Nicholas have reported seeing lights in the church's windows when no one was inside. So we have another church with just a plethora of horrible things. Someone taking their own life, a missing a man who has lost his loved one. My question is, why did all of this happen at this one church? Like, what really caused all of this to transpire in the first place? Are we just supposed to believe that it's all coincidence, or is there actually something more afoot here? I think that's the real secret, and sadly, I don't know if we're ever going to be able to find the true answer. And finally, number 1 on this list is St. Andres on the Red. Just that name alone. On the Red. Like, of course this place had to have some dark secrets. List first says St. Andrews on the Red, completed in 1849, is located in the town of Selkirk, which is more or less a suburb of Winnipeg. It's the oldest stone church in Western Canada, and it may be the region's most haunted thanks to the spirits of former plague victims. Other apparitions are said to populate the church's graveyard. Eyewitnesses have reported seeing a ghostly man clad in black and a mysterious woman in white. Also, a disembodied pair of red eyes have startled the visitors in the past, while a ghost car has been noted not far from the church's main entrance. If you're thinking about visiting the church or graveyard, be wary. Those who've claimed to have seen the various apparitions also reported having terrible nightmares the following nights. Most of these nightmares apparently involved the gates of the cemetery, which rattle even though no hands are seen shaking them. Some people can't shake these nightmares either. The occasional individual will have these persist for months or even years. I'm sure that the architecture and natural beauty is nice and all, but I'm not trying to risk nightmares for a year to see it. I do wonder what happened to those gates though. Is it some weird thing with the wind that's causing it, or is it what people suggest, some type of ghostly intervention? I tend to think some sort of spirit has to be involved, considering the thing with the nightmares happens as well, but you gotta wonder who. Sometimes I really do think that being a paranormal investigator would be awesome, because you could get to the bottom of these things, but then again, that's a pretty unforgiving profession.
In 5th place, we have diamond proof of an SA scandal. Alrighty, can I get a show of hands? What's the first thing you think of when I say priest and scandal in the same sentence? Do those two words have the initials SA? I had a feeling. So those are words that this platform doesn't really like, so pardon me while I try to dodge them, and I apologize in advance for how comical I'm about to sound. This affair kicks off on June 22nd of 2023 when the Society of Jesus of Bolivia acknowledged that it had received from the Vatican a copy of the diary belonging to the late Alfonso Pedrejas, who was a priest accused of taking advantage of dozens of minors. He died of cancer in 2009, so he never faced repercussions for his actions in his lifetime. Primarily known as Father Pica, he was placed in boarding schools for impoverished youth, primarily in Cochabamba in the 1970s. So the diary was turned over to the prosecutors in that same city for that reason, and it was discovered that the late priest kept detailed accounts of the underage horrors he committed in Bolivia. So at one point, according to his diary, he told a colleague about the crimes, only to be advised not to mention it in future confessions. Yeah, the good old ignore it and it'll go away approach. The priest's nephew, Fernando Pedrejas, discovered a printout of the diary in an attic and turned it over to a major newspaper. And in its pages, the priest wrote lines such as, "I hurt so many people, too many." The newspaper publishing excerpts from the diary prompted an outcry in Bolivia, and an official Vatican response. Go figure. Pope Francis promised to ensure the full cooperation of the Church to work alongside the government as it investigates the allegations. He also expressed sorrow over the ongoing revelations in the Catholic Church, calling them deplorable. Yeah, okay. And remind me again, what does full cooperation mean? Coming from an institution that covers up more than it discloses, pardon me if I take that with a pound of salt. Bolivian President Luis Arce has called on his country to strengthen controls to prevent foreign priests with, a history of sexual crimes from entering the country. country. Which, it's fine, and obviously I support that, and, great, but it's hard to find that out when the church is super skilled at covering things like that up. Priest Jordi Bortomeu, a sex crime investigator from the Vatican, arrived in Bolivia back in May to gather information about prevention efforts being undertaken within the church to stop these kinds of crimes. Well, that sums it up right there for me, folks. The church has its own sex crime investigator. It's such a problem that they have a specialist. And before someone feels like fighting me on this, specialty jobs like that only exist because there's a need and a problem. That's not the kind of job that just got created out of midair for kicks. The investigation into Pandrejas joins at least 12 other ongoing judicial probes into allegations of clergy sex crimes in Bolivia. So the Bolivian Episcopal Conference has said, one priest has already received a 10-year sentence for his crimes, while another priest, Milton Murillo, was sent to pretrial detention for 3 months in May. New testimony against Murillo emerged in the wake of the Pandrejas scandal as prosecutors called on survivors to step forward. Okie dokie. Time to move on before I start hissing like a tea kettle, and I swear by the end of today, I'm going to turn into a caricature with like a storm cloud over my head. In fourth place, we have a drastic loss of support. So in Germany, people who are formerly members of a church pay a so-called church tax that helps to finance it in addition to the regular taxes that the rest of the population have to pay. If they register their departure though with local authorities, they don't have to pay it anymore. Granted, there are some exceptions for like low earners, folks who are jobless, retirees, students, and etc. But I'm pretty sure here in North America, all money given is through donation, and you just, stop going on your own terms if you want, but it's more complicated elsewhere. But also feel free to let me know in the comments if I'm wrong, because I'm not a certain expert on Catholicism. Anywho, more than 500,000 people formally left the Catholic Church in Germany last year, which was significantly higher than the previous record. The German Bishops' Conference said specifically that over 522,000 people left the church last year, which is up from around 350,000 in 2021. In comparison, only 1,447 people joined the Catholic Church, which was around the same as the previous year. The departures left the number of Catholic Church members in Germany at nearly 21 million, which is just under a quarter of the population. Now, the Bishops' Conference didn't detail reasons for departures in this annual release of statistics, but many people have turned their backs on the church in recent years, amid fallout from scandal over bad things done by clergy and others. Wow, I'm shocked. In 2018, a church-commissioned report concluded that at least 3,667 people were harmed by clergy in Germany between 1946 and 2014, with more than half the victims being under 13, and nearly a third of that served as altar boys. Various dioceses tasked law firms or others to put together reports on their own past handling of these cases, which has led to massive tensions in the Cologne Archdiocese, where the Archbishop, Cardinal Rainer Maria Wolkai, drew widespread criticism for his handling of a report he commissioned. His offer of resignation has been pending with the Pope for months. Now, an independent report in the Munich Archdiocese, where the late Pope Benedict served as Archbishop from 1997 to 1982, last year faulted the handling of cases by a string of church officials past and present, including the then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger himself. The head of the Central Committee of German Catholics, an influential organization, said she was sad but not surprised at the number of departures last year, and has called for reforms and more thorough investigations. Yeah, good luck with that one. I ain't holding my breath. In third place, we have the Vatican Bank, so formerly known as the Institute for the Works of Religion, the Institute, or the IOR for short. It was founded in June of 1942 by papal decree of Pope Pius XII. So anyone want to guess when they presented their first public operations report? Come on, give it a try. Nope, not anywhere in the 1900s. 2013. Yep, that's what I said. 70 years later, they produced their first annual report. The thing that's supposed to be held every year. Previous to all this, all internal ledgers were destroyed every 10 years in accordance with their policy. So the IOR's role is to safeguard and administer property intended for works of religion or charity. And the bank accepts deposits only from top church officials and entities, and is run by a president, but overseen by 5 cardinals who report directly to the Vatican and the Vatican Secretary of State. So they only report to themselves. For reference, all banks that operate here in Canada have to report to the Minister of Finance. Just saying. Former bank president Ettore Tedeschi and the Vatican Bank have been investigated on 2 separate occasions for money laundering. In March of 2012, JP Morgan Chase closed a Vatican account in Milan after the IOR was unable to respond to questionable money transfers. In 2010, Italian authorities seized $30 million from a Vatican account at Italy's Credito Artigiano Spa, following allegations that the IOR violated anti-money laundering laws. Now, everybody denied wrongdoing, and no charges were ever filed. The money was released after the IOR promised to pass measures to come into full compliance with international standards on money laundering and terrorism financing. In September 2019, German Cardinal Reinhard Marx, who was in charge of the Vatican's Economic Council, confirmed that Pope Francis had instructed him to reduce costs in an effort to eliminate a deficit that is estimated to be around 70 million euros. Don't get excited though, that's not a concrete number from them because, that would be way too transparent. The exact amount is up for debate, because the Vatican had not published a budget since 2015 and has been without an in-house auditor for 2 years or more. And pardon me while I'm gonna blink real slowly here. The Vatican enjoys a property tax break for all non-commercial properties containing a chapel. So, using this loophole, between the years 2006 to 2011, the Vatican evaded taxes that amounted to 4 billion euros. The European Court of Justice ruled this illegal, and the Vatican had to cough up those euros as tax, because, you know, every kind of organization has that money lying around. And no, the Vatican did not entirely pay for evading taxes. It is argued that if you take into account the taxes that they evaded dating back to, let's say, 1992, they would owe over 13 billion euros. Yeah, I'm moving on before my eye twitch gets worse. In second place, we have the chronovisor. No, this isn't some weird, hat or goggles. Italian Benedictine monk Pellegrino Ernetti claimed to have used a time viewer which could film the past without sound, and used it to obtain a photograph of the crucifixion of Jesus and view scenes from ancient Rome, including a performance of a very lost play. Now, this was mostly scrubbed away in history until like 2002, when author Father Francois Brune swore in his book, Le Nouveau Mystère du Vatican, that the chronovisor not only exists, but he learned about it in the early 1960s. A day after he met scientist priest Father Pellegrino for the first time, the two were sailing along the Grand Canal of Venice, discussing biblical interpretations, when the father explained that theories and interpretations were unnecessary when one could see the truth for himself. So he explained to our lovely author how the chronovisor functioned, allowing the viewer to both see and hear events of the past and future. And hey, if you don't believe my word, his full account is in that book I mentioned earlier. So with a little digging, researchers will find first mentions of the chronovisor in a 1972 article published in the Italian magazine La Domenica del Corriere, entitled "A Machine That Photographs the Past Has Finally Been Invented." Belongs to the Vatican, and this chronovisor time machine is heralded as one of the papacy's best kept secrets. It's said to be replete with 3 precious alloys, cathodes, dials, levers, and has the ability to display myriad historic events in biblical and Roman history. So apparently, since it acts as some sort of television, it can verify all of this. Now, this time machine is claimed to have been invented in the 1950s by a dedicated and secret team of Italian scientists, including who I've already mentioned, Mr. Pellegrino himself. Critics may take credibility issues with the fact that he, eventually became a priest, but he was a scientist first. See, this critic doesn't take issue with that, more so that the Vatican is hiding a tool that could be used to help solve, unanswered crimes around the world and maybe help people. Like, imagine how many killings could be solved and how many families of lost people could have answers. Stop being selfish. In first place, we have the allegations from Arise Church. So an external review of Arise Church has called for its entire board to resign after reports from more than 500 current and former members, that include allegations of cult-like behavior, racism, SA, and conversion therapy came to light. So that report, compiled by a group called Pathfinding, which is, a consultancy firm for charitable organizations, was leaked to journalist David Ferrier, who revealed pretty damning allegations. The report was filled with experiences of, like I said, so many people involved with the church, which received nearly 15 million in donations the year before it was released. A 34-page summary of the investigation concluded it was undeniable that there had been significant hurts caused to people involved with Arise and egregious and systemic failures in governance over many years. And called for the board members to get the heck out. Arise Church senior pastor John Cameron did resign from his role following all these allegations, and Brent Cameron, pastor and brother of John, also resigned from his position around the same time. In a statement on its website, Arise said it was committed to safely share the stories of those who had participated and the report had been illegally obtained. Sure, whatever you say. The Pathfinding report recommended a full independent review of the church's finances, including, how donations tagged for certain purposes are used in reality, and a review of policies around expenditure limits for senior leadership. It also recommended disallowing tithing by younglings, and for those who are unaware, it means giving a percentage of your earnings. There was pressure to donate money, and some felt pretty uncomfortable about comments made about their donations. And oh no, I wish I could swear right now. Underage people should not have to give a percentage of their earnings to anything if they're working. In total, 545 people completed submissions for the review, including folks from every campus across the country, past and present ministry school students, current and former members, staff, and past board members. They revealed harmful practices that had continued up until present day, and a very significant number of people had experiences that caused pain and hurt. A review found racist remarks were said from those preaching on the stage, with some staff being told to focus on white kids. When troubling behavior was experienced by members, they felt unable to speak up due to the pressure to say yes and please senior leaders amid an honor culture that had a strong focus on leadership rather than Jesus. This culture created favoritism among members, and leaders sometimes used derogatory nicknames over a period of months for some individuals. So the reviewers heard from people who were pressured to continue working despite illness or serious injuries, including broken bones and concussions, and the dangers people faced driving through the night on no sleep to meet expectations, and operating heavy machinery after 17 hours of duty. Reviewers heard reports of people at the church who were part of the LGBTQI+ community being subjected to conversion therapy and denied opportunities to serve because of their sin. And when I tell y'all I almost burst into tears when I first read that, as an openly bisexual woman, in today's day and age, I just want to scream whenever someone claims sexuality other than heteronormativity is an abomination or a choice that can be changed. People are born this way and that's their lives. Let them be. It's not going to hurt your existence. Arise Church has reported a loss of almost 2.8 million, and after all of the above came out last year, I couldn't be happier. The average number of people at physical Sunday services fell from 4,000 people to under 3,000, and virtual services were attended by an average of 700 people, down from over 1,000. Numbers also fell across the church's programs for children, which went down 28%, and young people, which was down 62%.
Number 5. St. Catherine's head. Coming up first on our list of strange artifacts that the Catholic Church has hidden away is the severed, mummified head of the revered St. Catherine of Siena. You wouldn't really expect there to be a severed head kept out on display, but it is an important head, I've come to understand. When she was young, St. Catherine had a vision of Jesus on a throne surrounded by saints. Afterwards, she devoted her life to Catholicism and she gave herself to the nunnery, cut her hair, scalded herself, and took a vow of celibacy. At 28, Catherine was said to have received the stigmata when 5 red rays shot out of the crucifix she was praying to and pierced her hands, her feet, and her heart. But these were far from the only miracles attributed to the lovely St. Catherine, however. She was said to be seen levitating once during prayer, and even once a priest said he saw a Holy Communion fly from his hand directly into her mouth. Now, I will be honest, that does make her sound a bit like a saintly golden retriever, but okay. Catherine would pass at the young age of 33 and would be canonized a century later. If you don't know, that's a fancy word for being made into a saint post-mortem. While she passed in Rome, there was some disagreement as to where the young saint should be laid to rest eternally. Her hometown of Siena quite wanted her body back. Her spiritual leader, Raymond of Capua, knew he wouldn't really be able to smuggle her entire body past guards in Rome, so he elected to just take her head in a bag, which normally would be terrifying behavior, but it's good here. The story goes that when the guards intercepted Raymond, he prayed to Catherine, and when they looked inside his sack, they found naught but a collection of rose petals and not a severed head. Her final miracle. Now, the head was placed in a reliquary. That's a difficult word to say, especially on a teleprompter. The head was placed in a reliquary where it still remains today, and you can go and pray to it, and I promise it's not gonna blink or anything at you, even though it looks like it just might. And if you're looking for way more stories of creepy relics locked away, haunted object, cursed things, cryptids, conspiracies, aliens, the whole scary 9 yards, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some. So hit that little bell, hit subscribe, and make sure you do not miss a single thing. Do it after this video, okay? We got way more creepy things locked away coming up for you right now. Number 4, the Grand Grimoire. Our next entry has been formally referred to as the Gospel of Satan and is said to be a cursed book whose knowledge had to be sealed away to protect humanity. So this might be the most deadly book ever published after Hop on Pop. The Grand Grimoire, who is said to have been penned by a priest in the 16th century who was possessed by a litany of demons who compelled the man to put their knowledge to paper. Acting as a scribe for these demons, the man wrote everything they knew about dark incantations, spells, instructions on how to cast rituals, ways to bind a demon to you to make it your little minion and do your bidding. Wait, a demon gave instructions on how it wants to be bound to a human to serve humans? Freaky little demon. That's not all too. There's a step-by-step recipe for a little necromancy if you're down to dabble in some dark arts and make some bones dance to your rhythm. The book really covers all the fun stuff you have been told not to do. It's not just brimstone and hellfire neither. There's rituals to help manipulate luck, how to conduct a seance, and I actually think this is adorable. There's even ways to make people love you in there. But dating tip from old Tay, if you need a demon's help to make them like you, it might not be the strongest relationship. So just a heads up. Now, if all of this is sounding super appealing, and I don't blame you, I played a necromancer in Skyrim, I want to make the bones raise. Just know that this book is considered high treason. Even so much as cracking the spine is considered equivalent to selling your soul. So, you know, maybe hold off on that Amazon order for a bit. Also, I'm pretty sure the copy they're selling on Amazon is not the original, because due to the book's cursed reputation, the original copy is said to be locked away in the Vatican's secret archives, and I'm sorry, but no matter how many times you ask, they're not going to let you look at it, even if you swear you're just taking a little peek just to look at the illustrations and maybe the dedications. They're going to keep it locked up. I know. Number 3, Hyacinth of Caesarea. Our next entry is the bones of Hyacinth of Caesarea, another Catholic mummy. I'm starting to think there's more Catholic mummies than there were Egyptian ones. Incredibly ornate and gorgeous, the bones of Hyacinth look like something out of one of the Indiana Jones sequels, rather than like a real thing you can go and see, but I promise you they are totally extant. On the grounds of the Furstenfeld Abbey reside the relics of 2 saints. Now, these aren't just like a toenail or a tongue, and more on that later, but these are full-on science class skeletons dressed to the 9 in gold and jewels, encrusted in more diamonds and rubies than you could imagine. They are probably worth more than your and my apartments combined. Old Hyacinth, Hyci, as he liked to be called by his friends, was an obscure martyr from the early days of Christianity, slain by the Romans for his faith. We know precious little about him today, but we know that his name appears in a list of martyrs from the 4th century, which suggests that he used to be pretty important, and he was popular enough to write his name down on a list, much like what I'm doing right now. Look at how history repeats itself like that. Isn't that fascinating? Now, Hyacinth's skeleton showed up at the Church of the Assumption in, I'm going to excuse the pronunciation here, Furstenfeldbruck near Munich at an unknown date. Did somebody just dropped him off? Somebody just dumped a bag of bones on the front step like he's a baby you're giving up for adoption at the fire station? No more questions. The church was sacked by the Swedish army in the 17th century, and when it was rebuilt, they really went all out with the decor, going over the top, a little baroque, including a skeleton decked out in bling, looking like he is about to take over the skeleton rap scene. So that's Hyacinth, largely not remembered in life for any particular reason beyond being slain for his religion, and remembered forever as a ludicrously swagged out skeleton. We can all only hope for similar legacies as dear sweet Hyacinth. Number 2, the tongue of Saint Padilla. Did you know your tongue is made up of 8 muscles? Maybe you didn't. Did you know that one of the most important relics to the Catholic Church is a dried up 8,000-year-old tongue that looks like beef jerky kept inside a golden helmet that looks like something out of a dark fantasy 80s movie? Well, now you do. And have you enjoyed how much of this list is mummified bodies in gold? Because I have. St. Anthony was said to be a jewel case of the Bible, making a name for himself with his apparently extremely inspirational sermons that won the Catholic Church many new members. People would flock in just to hear what St. Anthony was talking about. Apparently, he even got a bunch of ex-Christians to reform and rejoin the faith. He was apparently an incredibly accomplished public speaker, and I would say that he had a silver tongue, but we actually have proof of what color his tongue was because it's kept in a little glass jar. St. Anthony would pass away in 1231 from edema, a horrible disease that causes a buildup and blockage of fluid in the body's tissues. Now, some 30 years later, in 1263, he was exhumed, and shocking the gravediggers who were doing it, while his body had rotted and decomposed, his legendary tongue was still intact, as incorruptible as it had been in life, allegedly still wet with saliva. I wonder if he could still taste. Seeing it was a miracle, the gravediggers took his tongue alongside the bottom half of his jaw, and they are both displayed in the Basilica of St. Anthony of Padua in elaborate gold reliquaries. But honestly, it looks like something straight out of Warhammer 40k. Does no one think this is as odd as I do? Maybe I'm an outsider. I didn't grow up terribly Catholic, so I don't really know these imagery. I know the story behind it isn't terribly scary, but the image of this tongue and jaw inside a little glass helmet wrapped in gold looks like something I would ask an AI to make if I typed in nightmare. A tongue shouldn't look like that. And I feel like a jaw shouldn't look like that either. Am I alone in this? Am I weird for thinking this is weird? You let me know down below in the comments if maybe I just lack context on all of this. And number 1, Camillus de Lellis' heart. Camillus de Lellis was a man with a big heart full of love, never ending in generosity. We know just how big his heart is because it is kept in a glass jar and it is salted to preserve its legacy. Camillus started out pretty humble, born in 16th century Naples. He would later become a soldier until a brutal gambling problem would end up overtaking his life, leaving him in rags driving a donkey cart, but he knew that a far better life was out there. Eventually, he was urged by a friar to explore the lighter side of his soul, and eventually someone was able to pierce his heart both figuratively and later literally, and persuaded him into seeking divine retribution. Camillus would devote his life to providing for the ailing, but tragically, and perhaps unsurprisingly if you spent all your time around sick people before modern medicine, a lifetime of caring for the sick led to him also becoming gravely ill, soaking up a litany of ailments, including a sore in his leg for 46 years, a rupture for 38 years, 2 callous sores in the sole of a foot, violent nephritic colics, intense kidney pain, and for a long time a loss of appetite. Now all of these things, working in tandem, would eventually claim Camillus, a man who gave his life to healing the sick. So post-mortem he was canonized and thought of as the patron saint of the sick. And what better way, I ask, to venerate a man famous for his ever-giving heart than to cut his heart out like he was in the Temple of Doom and start salting his heart like it was beef jerky. You can go to St. Mary Magdalene's Church in Rome to go see if his heart, put a stethoscope up to it, check if it's still beating, but it's pretty dried up and tucked away behind glass where you can go and pay your respects and see if it has any life left to bestow and maybe if it'll help you out with an illness at all. Number 5. Hans Schmidt. I think all of us, we want to be remembered for something amazing someday, right? That's only human. For walking on the moon, for writing the great American novel. Me? I want to be remembered for being a slightly above average YouTube host for spooky internet comment. Well, Hans Schmidt, a German priest, he's certainly remembered and found himself a legacy when he became the only Roman Catholic priest in American history to face the death sentence. They probably didn't put that on his tombstone or anything though. They say that you can see the signs of darkness from a very early age. Schmidt had wanted to be a priest since an early age, funny enough, but he was also routinely caught killing animals and drinking the fluids that were inside, and would apparently spend most of his youth at the slaughterhouse. And also his Wikipedia page mentions that he had a collection of severed geese heads that he'd put in his pockets. So yeah, maybe there were some warning signs and red flags here that people really were not paying attention to. By age 25, Hans Schmidt was ordained to be a priest and served over Mass for 4 years in Germany before relocating to Louisiana. Schmidt got himself involved in some wild crimes, doing some unspeakable things that the church covered up for him. Wasn't that nice of them? And they once again found him on the move, and he was sent to Manhattan at St. Boniface Church. Here, Schmidt would meet with the love of his life, Anna Muller. He became immediately obsessed with her, claiming that it was God's will he fall in love with her. Oh my god, ladies, don't you just hate it when a guy pulls the old, oh, it's God's will, it's God's will? Oh, all the time, eh? He began an affair with her and he held a secret wedding, vowing to leave the cloth with her. When a Muller became pregnant, Schmidt knew he would be outed for disobeying the oath of priesthood. So, being a reasonable thinking man of God, Schmidt's solution was to slit her throat and remove her limbs and throw it in the Hudson River, and then went to Mass the next day. Oh, no, that's actually not very priest-like at all. Schmidt was tried, convicted, and executed in Sing Sing prison, where, like I mentioned earlier, he remains the only American priest that's ever happened to. Although from what I've learned about the guy, I don't think anyone would complain too much that happened. I don't know if this was a huge loss. And if you're looking for way more stories of creepy crawlies, ghosts, goblins, conspiracies, and basically anything freaky under the sun and above it that you can think up, hit subscribe for Top 5 Scary and don't miss a single scream. Make sure you hit that little bell, but do it at the end of this video if you wouldn't mind. Number 4, Gerald Robinson. Hey, a little hypothetical question. If you're a priest, how much Satanism are you allowed to dabble in? Probably not much, right? They probably would prefer that be like as zero as possible. Gerald Robinson was a Catholic priest, but was living a double life, practicing satanic rituals in secret with horrifying consequence. In the 1980s, Robinson was the chaplain at Mercy Hospital in Toledo, where he ministered over the terminally ill. The caretaker of the chapel there was a nun named Sister Margaret Ann Powell, a kindly old woman. Shockingly and horrifyingly, Paul was killed after being stabbed 31 times with 9 times in a deliberate shape of an inverted cross, and a smear across her forehead symbolizing a mockery of last rites. Police suspected someone was trying to humiliate Paul in death. Father Robinson was questioned, but not charged. A clergyman took Father Robinson out of his questioning, and the case would freeze for nearly 30 years. Reports on the case would disappear, and police believed there was a conspiracy of a cover-up. It wasn't until late in 2003 when police received a letter from a woman using the name Survivor Doe, claiming that she had suffered under the hands of Father Robinson, who had been assaulting women and practicing satanic rituals up to and including human sacrifice. With these new, lofty allegations, authorities reopened the case, and upon searching Robinson's apartment, discovered a sword-shaped letter opener that fit the wound in the nun's body like a key to a lock, according to prosecutors. What a charming turn of a phrase for a horrible thing. In 2006, Robinson was charged, and hopefully Sister Paul was able to find some peace in the afterlife after such a mortifying ordeal. Number 3, Father Daniel Petrokorgano. When you take the cloth, you get called on for all sorts of things: marriages, funeral rites, confessions, and in the extreme cases, exorcisms, where you're the last line of spiritual defense against a demonic spirit that has taken host of someone else's body. Of course, exorcisms don't always go the way that you would hope. You know, sometimes a little pea soup gets fired across the room. Sometimes the person you're exorcising accidentally dies from your neglect. You know, anything can happen, really. Father Daniel Petrokorgano believed that a member of his flock, a nun in the convent, one Sister Marcia Corici, became the unwilling host to a demon that had moved in and paid first and last for rent inside her soul. Now, she was experiencing classical symptoms of schizophrenia, but Korgano believed it to be demonic possession. Sister Corici was bound at her ankles and wrists and given holy water to drink, which she threw up. I don't really blame her. I bet it probably tastes weird. Rather brutally, after this, Sister Corici was bound to a cross and was gagged with a wet cloth soaked in holy water, which we already know she doesn't like the taste of. From here, she was cruelly subjected to a round-the-clock exercising over the course of 3 days. I cannot even imagine how mentally and physically taxing that was. Now, she wasn't fed during this time, nor were any of her medical needs tended to. And I don't know how much you know about like medical stuff or the human body, but you need food to live. Sister Corici would unsurprisingly pass away from complications suffered during the exorcism, leaving this earth a free soul, if for nothing else. Now, Father Korgano would undergo investigation for his involvement in Cornici's death. He insisted that he was simply following God's plan and that he was trying to cure her the way God intended, and her death was an unfortunate accident and not his intention. Well, sure, you didn't kill her, but you did tie her to a cross and not feed her for 3 days, so you definitely helped. I don't know how to tell you. In the end, though, Sister Cornici's death was officially ruled to be caused by an overdose of adrenaline injections when she was taken into the hospital. Okay, well that clears it up then. Total accident. Number 2, the wild and wacky life of Pope Benedict IX. Over the years, there have been many controversial popes. In fact, I would bet you can probably find more popes wrapped in controversy than not. While it's kind of pointless to compare sins on a sort of moral scale, it's hard to argue that few popes got up to even half as much chaos and trouble as Pope Benedict IX. So notorious, he once sold the position when he got bored of it. He's just done. He sold it. It said he began his pontification when he was a young man because his family wanted it. They just wanted it. They wanted him to be pope. Benedict loved the lifestyle and behaved the way Joffrey Baratheon would, spending his money on women of the night, hosting lecherous, wild, erotic parties with all manner of man, woman, and apparently animals as well. He really was not picky. It wasn't long before there were conspiracies being drawn up to assassinate the Pope, if you can believe that. Imagine that. There were guys sitting around a table being like, hey, we gotta do something about the Pope. I think we have to assassinate him. Possibly in a case of divine intervention, his enemies on a feast day snuck into St. Peter's Basilica, carrying rope ready to strangle Benedict, but a solar eclipse of the sun scared the assassins so badly they called the whole plan off. And fair. If I was planning to dispose of the Pope and then like 5 minutes beforehand I saw the sun get blackened out, I would assume God was gonna strike me down then and there. Failed coups notwithstanding, Pope Benedict's reputation did not improve much. He was attacked by an angry mob in 1045, forced to flee, and replaced by another pope, one Sylvester III. 2 months later though, Benedict would return to reclaim the title. And then 2 months again, he decided that honestly he wasn't really vibing with this pope business anymore, what with the constant bombardment and attempts on his life, and sold it to his godfather for what amounted to nearly 30 million American dollars. Imagine buying the Pope. Imagine the highest seat you can have in the Catholic Church and you bought it. If you can believe it, like Emperor Palpatine, somehow Pope Benedict returned. They just could not get rid of this guy. King Henry III of Germany had arrested Pope Sylvester for being a false pope, and the godfather Benedict sold the throne to had given up the seat, admitting that it was wrong for him to buy being the pope. It was wrong to buy the papacy. I could have told you that. Henry appointed a new German pope while Benedict was in hiding, and then that pope passed away mysteriously 8 months later after being poisoned, which many historians suspect Benedict had his little fingers in. So Benedict came back to be a pope for a third time, and no one was putting up with this. Henry III sent troops to drag him out of the basilica, and he spent his dying years in a monastery where he is now remembered as one of the worst popes in history. But he sounds fun. Number 1, Oliver O'Grady. All of these people have been awful or downright embarrassing examples of priests, and yet Oliver O'Grady might be the worst of all of them. YouTube content guidelines really does not like for us to be discussing the kind of crimes that he committed, but I will say this. If I say a Catholic priest committed a crime, it's the first one that you're imagining right now. It's that one. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you might not be old enough to watch these videos. O'Grady began his career in the early 70s and committed innumerable immoral, irredeemable acts on the most vulnerable members of his flock. By 1993, he was convicted and sentenced to a 14-year prison sentence and a $7 million settlement to the victims whose families and lives he'd ruined. However, and if you don't want your day ruined, pause this video, open up another tab, go watch a video of some kittens playing or anything. Nothing good is about to happen here. He only served half that sentence. He served 7 years and was then paroled and deported in Ireland. In 2005, a video deposition had O'Grady confessing to having had 25 victims. In 2006, a documentary made about Oliver O'Grady called Deliver Us from Evil focused on his crimes, but more importantly, how the Catholic Church pulled a nice big white rug over the horrific crimes he committed to protect their clergy. The documentary outlines how O'Grady preyed on his victims, how he committed his crimes, and how the church was very well aware of everything he was doing and swept it under the rug. In 2019, O'Grady was arrested again. Oh, I can't believe it. He seemed like such a good guy. This time for owning deeply illegal lewd content. O'Grady would find himself in jail again in 2020, sentenced to 22 months, which seems kind of like a slap on the wrist given the history, but what do I know? Generally, I think if they make documentaries about the crimes that you've committed, that should impact the sentence slightly. But again, I'm not a lawyer.
Coming in at number 5, we have the Vatican Secret Archives. The Vatican Secret Archives is considered to be the world's most secure building, but why is it so locked down? What secrets are being hidden behind the walls? The amount of history located there is immense. The Vatican Secret Archives is home to the largest collection of Catholic books, documents, and doctrine in the world. It boasts letters from well-known figures such as Abraham Lincoln and Mary, Queen of Scots. It contains 53 miles of shelving with 35,000 volumes in the selective catalogue alone. The archives also include state papers, correspondence, account books, and many other documents the church has acquired over the centuries. Naturally, many people have speculated that there must be secret documents amongst the 50+ miles of shelving in the Vatican's archives. Of course, no one is allowed to browse the archives, which makes it even more mysterious. Only select scholars, academics, and journalists are allowed to enter, and this is a rule that will never likely change. Many believe that the Pope and many people around him keep very classified and secret information in the archives that they don't want the world knowing. One theory is that the archives contains correspondence between St. Paul and Emperor Nero pertaining to Jesus' existence and his biological descendants, and some believe that the Vatican may be hiding proof that Jesus did in fact exist or didn't exist at all. Next is the confirmation and evidence of alien life forms such as extraterrestrial skulls. Some claim that in 1998 skulls with elongated heads and small faces resembling aliens were found underneath the Vatican. Ever since, the Vatican has kept all evidence of aliens a secret to not discredit Christianity. Another secret being held from the world is the Grand Grimoire, which is an alleged medieval book that is believed to possess immense powers. It was written in the 16th century by Honorius of Thebes, who claimed to be possessed by the devil himself. In the book, it has instructions on how to make magic talismans and amulets, how to make magic spells, and even how to summon demons, and even offers instructions on how to summon the devil himself and make a deal with him. If the Vatican is keeping world-shattering secrets in its archives, we may never know due to its high level of security, and it only being accessible to a slight few. So our questions of what is really in there may never be answered. In at number 4 we have the Church of Rome, destruction of important Jewish historical documentation. In 1415 the Church of Rome took an extraordinary step to destroy all knowledge of the two 2nd century Jewish books that is said contained the true name of Jesus Christ. The Antipope Benedict XIII firstly signalled out for condemnation a secret Latin treatise called Mar Jesu, and then issued instructions to destroy all of the copies of the Book of Alaxi. No editions of these writings now publicly exist, but church archives recorded that they were once in popular circulation and known to early presbyters. Knowledge of these writings survived from quotations made by Bishop Hippolytus of Rome and Saint Epiphanius of Salamis, along with references in some early traditions of the Talmud of Palestine and Babylonia. The rabbinic fraternity once held the destroyed manuscripts with great reference, for they were comprehensive original records reporting of the life of Rabbi Jesus. Later, in a similar manner, Pope Alexander VI ordered all copies of Talmud destroyed. The Council of the Inquisition required as many Jewish writings as possible to burn with the Spanish Grand Inquisitor. Thomas de Torquemada, responsible for the elimination of 6,000 volumes at Salamanca. In 1550, Cardinal Carafa, the Inquisitor General, repealed all previous permission for priests to read the Talmud, which he said contained hostile stories about Jesus Christ, leading him to seize every copy he could find in Rome and burn them. Solomon Romano also burnt many thousands of Hebrew scrolls, and in 1559 every Hebrew book in the city of Prague was confiscated. The mass destruction of Jewish books included hundreds of copies of the Old Testament and caused irreversible loss of many original handwritten documents. The mass destruction of Jewish writings, the church overlooked 2 particular British documents that still exist to this day in the British Museum. Coming in at number 3 we have the Orphans of Duplessis. In the 1930s and 1940s in Quebec City was marred by unprecedented acts of corruption and repression due to a conservative revolution better known as the Great Darkness, which was led by Premier Maurice Duplessis, and many of the acts were involving the Catholic Church. In 1940 the Duplessis government and along with the Catholic Church began to diagnose orphan children with mental problems, even though these children were perfectly healthy. Due to this, thousands of orphan children were sent to a psychiatric institution of the church so that the church could receive a government subsidy for the treatment of these children. Unfortunately, this was a reality for so many because mental health wasn't as widely known as today, and it was unknown how to treat those suffering back then. At this time, many orphanages were converted into asylums for children, and more than 20,000 were misdiagnosed and imprisoned in asylums so that the Catholic Church could earn more money. According to reports, many of these children weren't orphans at all, but children coming from single mothers who were forcibly taken into church custody, and they didn't admit children out of wedlock. The people forced to be involved in this were subjected to nightmares, including drug testing and other medical experiments like electric shock therapy. In the 1990s, almost 3,000 survivors of the Duplessis orphan scandal revealed the horrific events they had to go through, but the government made a sad excuse of a settlement with the victims, and the Catholic Church remained silent to stifle the scandal. In at number 2 we have Joan of Arc. Most people know the story of Joan of Arc. She is mostly considered a hero of France for her role during the war. She is now considered a saint, but the Catholic Church hated her. She claimed that she was receiving messages from God, instructions on what she should do to help her people. This angered many higher ranking officials within the church. Joan saw her first vision around the age of 13 in 1425. The figure she identified as Saint Michael surrounded by angels appeared in her garden. After receiving the vision, she wept as she wanted to go with him. Throughout her life, she continued to be visited and given messages from the Lord. By 1428, Joan's visions told her she must leave her home and go to France. Since then, she gained followers and support in her fight to recover France from English domination. The Catholic Church denounced her visions and set out to take her down. In 1430, Joan was captured. She was put on trial for heresy, even though Joan was a devout Christian. They gave Joan as many charges as they could, hoping she would be found guilty of at least one of them. The military were relieved of her capture. They believed her to have supernatural powers. They feared her as it was not typical for women to wield such power and command. One of the most well-known charges against Joan was that she wore men's clothing, something apparently illegal back then. In reality, this came from the fact that she wore armor while in enemy territory, something not seen as being ladylike for the time. The trial was not conventional for the time. It was clear no matter what she did, they were determined to find her guilty. Although she was impressive during the trial, she was ultimately found guilty. She was found guilty of heresy and sentenced to death. She was to be burned at the stake. Joan is seen as a hero and a saint today. The Catholic Church tries to distance themselves from her mistreatment. And finally, in at number 1, we have the Vatican's quest for aliens. It might surprise you to know that the Catholic Church has a keen interest in aliens. They hold a conference each year to talk about astrobiology. If you haven't heard that term before, it's a term they created to make their meetings about aliens seem more legitimate. The Vatican has often defended itself in the public about their interest in extraterrestrial. As they often state, evolution is not something they believe in. You would assume they also didn't believe in aliens. The Vatican even has its own team of scientists looking into the existence of these beings and attempting to make contact. The chief astronomer stated, "There is no conflict between believing in God and in the possibility of extraterrestrial brothers, perhaps more evolved than humans." He went on to explain that you cannot put limits on God's creative freedom, so it makes sense after creating Earth he would go to create other beings. Some even believe that humans are lost sheep of the universe, and we need to find the more evolved of God's creations. All of this would not be such a surprise if they hadn't condemned science since the creation of the church. In the 17th century they condemned the astronomer Galileo for insisting that the Earth revolved around the sun. It seems they had progressed in some of their beliefs since then. Some believe that they spent a lot of money on their exploration into space and have even discovered a few things that they are keeping to themselves. Some historians believe that within the Vatican secret archive there is evidence of contact with extraterrestrials. It is not known why they would keep this information from the world. Do they want to use it to further their beliefs, or maybe they don't consider everyone to be worthy? We do know there are stories of communication with other beings, but the information is mostly kept with the church. In 1917, 3 children saw the Virgin Mary, who gave them a telepathic message. The message was that we are not alone on the planet. They warned that humanity needs to prepare for their return. The Catholic Church censored these messages. The only person who knew the full content of the message was the Pope, who refused to release the details of all 3. This is just one instance of messages received on Earth that have been held by the Vatican for years. It is believed they have no intention to release this information. The archive is heavily guarded. Who knows what could be hidden within their findings?